displays. Sorry. Okay. She provides displays, programs, and collections for the teen patrons, including a popular banned books display in September for Banned Books Week. The library director, Mary Beth Harper, is also in attendance, and she's graciously offered to answer any questions related to library policy that may come up. We're going to structure this meeting similar to a webinar. The speakers will have control of the screen, and everybody, all the attendees will be muted, but the chat will be open. At the end of the talks, the speakers will take questions from the chat, and we hope to have a good open discussion about issues that are raised around banned books. Jan Dorner is going to be monitoring the chat, and I'll read the questions at the end. This program is being put on by the League of Women Voters, not the Elmhurst Public Library. And before I turn the meeting over to the presenters, I want to remind everybody that the League of Women Voters of Elmhurst supports that membership in the League, supports our membership in the League, supports our organization, and specifically the publication of the Illinois Voters Guide. And I know it's February and we haven't had daylight savings time yet, but midterm elections are coming up in June. So we're getting ready. We'll also be helping to train citizens on the new voting machines. So please become a member or renew your membership. You can do that at our website, LWVElmhurst.org. We are being recorded, and without further ado, I am going to turn the meeting over to, I believe, Alyssa. Are you going first?
Yeah, well, I'm actually sharing the PowerPoint, but I think Patty's talking first. But
okay, Alyssa and Patti. Okay, yes. Great.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and start the slide. Oh, and another thing that I forgot to say is I will make this PowerPoint presentation available to the League, and then you guys can disseminate it any way that you want to. There's a lot of links in the presentation, so I think that people might, after the fact, kind of enjoy going through and looking at some of the stuff we looked at, and then also doing a little research on your own if it's something you're interested in.
Okay.
So like Marsha already said, I'm Alyssa Murphy. I'm the Civic Engagement Librarian. Patti is the Teen Librarian, and Patti is going to be starting us off.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for having us. I'm going to start out talking about what is book banning, and as it says on the screen there, a ban is an actual removal of materials from the library based on objections of a person or a group. Sometimes a ban may be a committee decision or an administrator or staff without following a library's policy, because we do have policies on looking at books, reconsidering books when citizens have comments, have questions, wondering if this book is appropriate. A challenge is an attempt to have a library resource or program removed or have access restricted, again, based on objections. Challenges don't mean they mean the book was not removed, but they are a person or a group expressing their point of view and wanting the material removed.
This is what your mother wants to hear. So we'll turn up the volume, which is, where is it on here?
David,
so
David, mute yourself, please.
So challenges can lead to the items being removed. The American Library Association, which we librarians call ALA, has some statements on that. The association in 1953, along with the Association of American Publishers, adopted the Freedom to Read statement. There's on the resource page at the end, there's a link to that. But the first part of it just says that freedom to read is essential to our democracy. It is continuously under attack. Private groups and public authorities in various parts of the country are working to remove or limit access to reading materials, to censor content in schools, to label controversial views, to distribute lists of objectionable books or authors, and to purge libraries. And the statement goes on, and like I said, this was 1953, and it's also been endorsed by a number of other groups, including the American Booksellers Association, the Council of Teachers of English, and more others. There's also the Library Bill of Rights, which was adopted in 1939 and has been modified somewhat over the years, just like the Freedom to Read Statement. And it discusses several points, including affirming that libraries are forums for information and ideas, and talks about the following basic policies. And that the main one is books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all the people in the community the library serves. Material should not be excluded because of the origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. And it goes on from there. So there's, like we said, there's a difference between banning and challenging a book. Somebody had mentioned the Roxane Gay article that where she was going to remove her podcast from Spotify. I don't know if people are familiar with the Spotify controversy where Joe Rogan has his podcast there, and he's one of the things he was noted for was being anti-vaccine, and some people have questioned the accuracy of his statements. So Roxane Gay and some other musicians have removed themselves from Spotify. However, that is not really censorship. It's a business decision, a personal decision on those people's part, or a decision of curating. So it's not the same as censorship, because Joe Rogan's still on Spotify, or he's been offered a number of other platforms. So he's still out there.
All right, Patti, good for me to advance?
Yep.
All right. So here we go. All right, so here's a list of the most popular, I guess popular is not quite the right way to put it, but the most commonly challenged titles of 2020. And I wanted to put this slide together just to give you an idea of the breadth and the types of books that get challenged. So the first one is Melissa by Alex Dino. It's actually a middle grade novel about a young girl who realizes that she's trans, and then her attempts to get accepted as a girl by her classmates. So some of the reasons why that was challenged was the LGBTQ content and the fact that they thought that was not age appropriate for that age group. Skipping down a little bit, Speak by Laurie Halsey Anderson is about sorry, let me go to my page here. So when she was a teen, she was a victim of sexual assault, and it's about her journey to talking and getting help. But unfortunately, some people have interpreted that book as being too graphic. But unfortunately, sometimes real teens' lives are also that graphic. Jumping down a little farther, you see To Kill a Mockingbird and Of Mice and Men and The Bluest Eye. 3 books that, all of us would probably consider to be classics that we might have had on our own reading lists when we were in high school. And a lot of the reasons why those have been challenged actually is because of insensitive language, or, usage of the N-word, or usage of white savior stereotypes. So a lot of times challenges are not necessarily, what we think about typically, where it's somebody who's, maybe not wanting their children or their students to be exposed to certain ideas that, are on a conservative side. Sometimes it's actually challenges coming from the other side of the political spectrum. So I think it's important that people realize that book banning is something that's coming from both sides. It is a political issue. It's an issue that's very influenced by politics, but it's something where that's happening on both sides of the spectrum. I wanted to share this slide because ALA did a really cool word cloud here of all of the titles that were challenged in 2020 and what phrases appeared a lot in the challenges. So you can see that some of the ones that appear a lot are, as I mentioned with the issue of Melissa, LGBTQIA content, political viewpoints, anti-racism. So this is something that's kind of interesting to look at on your own later, but you can see some of the things that came up a lot as examples for why things were getting challenged. One thing I wanted to note here with this slide, this is actually a really interesting poll that CBS did, and it's actually just from mid-February of this month, so it's very recent. But just a poll of, I believe it was about 2,500 Americans about whether they think books in schools should be banned for various things. So you can see that the average American, so 85% of people, 87, 83% of people don't think that books should be banned. So I think it's important to realize that the people who are putting forward book bans are absolutely the minority. So it's not, you know, a majority of parents. I think a lot of times the groups that put forth these challenges will have names like 1 million moms, or if you think back to the 1980s, the idea of that moral majority. A lot of times groups that are putting forth these challenges are trying to use rhetoric that makes it look like they're the majority. But if you look at poll data, you find that actually they're absolutely in the minority. One issue I wanted to talk about with book banning and censorship is it's not always as big and loud as an official challenge being made at a school board meeting. Sometimes it's that soft and quiet censorship where the materials are removed, limited, or just never purchased, even though that might be a title that would serve the community. I wanted to put drama on this slide because this was a really good example. So I don't know if any of you have kids, you've probably heard of Raina Telgemeier. She's a hugely popular graphic novelist for children and for very young adults, I would say like junior high school. Her first few books were not challenged at all, but this book came out and it has a very, very tame scene with a gay character kissing another gay character. And it saw a lot of challenges. And that was one where a lot of elementary schools just quietly chose not to put it in the collection. Like it would be bought at the junior high school level, but it wouldn't be bought at the elementary school level. And one of the ways that I have absolute proof that this happened is my mother, who recently retired, is an elementary school librarian. And we actually had a conversation about how she chose not to purchase this book for her elementary school library because she didn't want to deal with potential fallout and challenges. So it's absolutely a fear that as book bans get more popular, one of the worst effects of them is that people might preemptively censor themselves. They might be tempted to be, well, like, oh, I just don't want to deal with all of the potential fallout, so I'm just going to quietly not purchase this book and pretend that it's just a professional decision and then not think about it again. So sometimes the worst parts of book banning and censorship are the things that we really can't measure, and that's that soft or quiet censorship. So getting into what we wanted to talk about today, which is the very recent uptick in challenges that we've seen. So a hard statistic is that the ALA measured that in the year 2020, there were 156 challenges all year. The official 2021 numbers are not out yet, but just for fall of 2020, so a period from September 1st through November 30th, there were 330 challenges, and that's just one season within 2021. Another interesting thing to note about ALA statistics is that in about 2010, a Missouri teen did FOIA requests of all Missouri school districts, that's Freedom of Information Act requests, to get like the notes from school boards. And they actually found that very few challenges get reported. The student found 83 challenges, so evidence of 83 challenges in Missouri school districts, but the ALA had only heard about 12% of those challenges. So anytime that you see an ALA statistic of book banning, it's likely not telling the whole story because the ALA is requiring, or not requiring, but relying on librarians actually reporting those challenges to the Office of Intellectual Freedom. So anytime you see a number of challenges, know that the number is, the ALA estimates 82 to 97% higher. So whenever you hear about a challenge, it's likely that it's much higher. And Patti, I wanted to give you a chance to say something about Mouse here, the book here we have on the slide.
Okay, before that, I was in a Freedom to Read webinar just a few hours ago, which was put on by Booklist, one of the library review publications, along with the Texas Library Association and people in Texas, where they are dealing with a lot of issues, including a bill that wants to criminally prosecute librarians and teachers for disputed materials. But one thing that there were people from ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom at the end of the webinar. The challenges in 2020 were down because of the pandemic. You know, we all know just not a lot happened in 2020, but they are expecting the 2021 numbers to exceed 2019, the previous year before the pandemic. So, and like Alyssa said, these are only the things that get reported to ALA. So the numbers are probably much higher. Mouse, as I'm sure you've heard about in Tennessee, they were removing it from an 8th grade curriculum on the Holocaust. This book has long been just considered a classic of the graphic novel genre. The author's parents were victims of the Holocaust. He chose to illustrate, to tell the story through illustrations, and to have the Jewish people are the mice and the Nazis are the cats. And it's been, they challenged it on language and nudity, which there are no people depicted in the book, just the animals.
Nice.
So that's, yeah, take from that what you will. Mouse was on York's summer reading list in 2011. So a lot of students read it. And I don't recall anybody objecting to the book. To me, upstairs, you know, we have a display of the York summer reading books every year, and I didn't hear anything about it. Nobody in our department mentioned it, so I don't think there was anything questioned about it. And the other issue that librarians and that have brought up, the group that wants to censor this book has not come forward with any alternatives to books discussing the Holocaust that would be appropriate for the 8th grade level. So that's another thing. They're removing something from the curriculum that they are studying as a part of history and kind of leaving a hole there, excuse me, by not offering an alternative. Okay,
All right, good
Alyssa.
for me to advance. All right. So now to get into some of the ideas about what might be causing this uptick, this recent uptick in book banning. So one thing that a lot of people have been seeing that have been studying this phenomenon is that unlike in the past where it was like flash in the pan, you know, an individual person being offended by an individual book and then making a challenge, there's an organized, politicized efforts to ban books as a campaigning strategy. For example, the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, actually successfully just won the governorship of Virginia, campaigning very, very heavily on the back of one local mother's attempt to try to get the book Beloved banned from the local high school. So it's something where people who are running for office are finding that this is a successful strategy. And again, that's another thing where I want to mention where the group of people who are doing this, like the conservative politicians primarily who are doing this, don't actually reflect the opinions of most conservative voters. So I'm gonna switch my screen here because I wanted to show you the detailed results of that poll that I mentioned earlier. So you'll recall earlier that 85% of people thought that books should not be banned, even if they disagreed with them. If you dig more into the data, they actually broke down the responses based on whether the people who are answering the question were liberal, moderate, or conservative. So you can see that even among conservative people who are, you know, the ones who are supposedly being represented by the politicians who are trying to do this, again, 85% of conservatives don't think that books should be banned because of political ideas they disagree with. 85% of conservatives think that books should not be banned for depictions of slavery. And going down a little more, 83% of conservatives believe that discussions of race are not something that should get a book banned. So you can see there's actually a lot more broad-based agreement than there is difference. And it's really, you know, politicians are finding this a successful strategy, but average people are in general overwhelmingly not in favor of banning books. Another quote that I found really interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Now, I just wanted to say to that, the other information I got from the webinar today, there was a librarian from the Texas Library Association, and there was also a woman who's a state representative for the House of Representatives in Texas. And she talked about a lot of this being politically motivated, how Texas, like the other states, because of the recent census, are redistricting, and they are looking for issues to get themselves elected. So these, as she said, squeaky wheels, so these challenges that are coming up in school districts, and that the politicians are latching on to them. And the people in the webinar, who were all from Texas, except for the ALA people, said that this is not the way most Texans feel, and that generally these issues should be and are decided locally. They're not election issues, but like Alyssa said, we're seeing that change somewhat now.
It's
Okay.
definitely becoming more politicized. So one quote here that I pulled out that I thought was just a really interesting encapsulation of the kind of people who, you know, maybe will see something that their child is reading and be intimidated by it, and maybe be motivated to challenge it, is just that people are unsure if their values are being transferred to the next generation. And their thought is that maybe they can make sure that those values are transmitted if we don't have students read these books. So if you think of kind of that psychology behind challenging books, a lot of time it is rooted in fear. It's rooted in that idea that maybe the next generation won't think the same things that you do. And maybe if you can, you know, pull back a little bit on what you're reading, you can make sure that your values are being transmitted. So there's always a very human psychology behind even the politicized efforts to ban books as a campaign strategy. Another thing that social scientists have found is that a lot of this book banning is a backlash against recent social and racial justice movements. So if you go back a few slides to this reasons for challenges, you'll notice that anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, and where did it go? Racist and anti-police viewpoint are all very common reasons for things being challenged. And I'm not saying that that's not the case before. There were definitely challenges before that were based on different interpretations of race, but it's something that's seen a huge uptick. Like if you look at the older lists of banned books versus the newer ones, there's definitely a shift that a lot more Black and brown voices are ending up on that list of challenged books.
Yeah, in the past, the main reasons for banning were the material was considered to be sexually explicit, or it contained offensive language, or it was unsuited to a particular age group or to any age group. In 1999, that shifted when Harry Potter was published and continued on through the Harry Potter books, because there were many Christian groups objecting to Harry Potter because they were saying it was promoting witchcraft. And then since then, as you can see, things have taken a turn to you know, more racist issues and the things Alyssa just mentioned. So they're not all the reasons we saw in the past.
It's definitely a shift over time. Another quote that I wanted to pull out here, and I sort of touched on this on the soft censorship slide, is that the more that you look at attempts of book banning and censorship, it's clear that the main goal isn't necessarily to silence or destroy the books that already exist. It's to frighten people and discourage them from reading similar works in the future. So every time that, you know, book banning or book challenges go up, it's going to influence people's decisions about what to buy and what to read and what becomes accessible in the future. So the goalposts move every time that a book gets challenged. The idea of what's acceptable in our culture for a certain age group, that goalpost moves. So that's something important to keep in mind, that a lot of people will sometimes say jokingly, like, oh, well, they tried to ban this book, but that's the best way to get a teenager interested in it. Like a teenager isn't interested in reading, but then suddenly you ban the book and they're all about reading it. It's not necessarily about silencing that particular book. Sometimes it's just about silencing similar books or books that fill that similar niche for a student or for even an adult.
And I'll jump in since you mentioned teenagers.
Go for it.
And the group that I deal with, one thing that the teenagers need, you know, with everything that's going on in their lives in those years, is they need somewhere to belong. They need a sense to know that they're not alone. They need representation. And books provide that. If you are, as one of the girls in Texas today said, she's an African-American, a lot of times she's the only Black girl in her class. And books have helped her not to feel so alone. And there's also a movement of the past few years in books and publishing called Own Voices, where you have Black authors writing about the Black experience, gay people writing about the gay experience. We've had recently new teen books about Native Americans being written by Native Americans. And that representation really matters to teens. The other student that spoke today is an Asian American boy who is gay, grew up in a conservative household, and books helped him to feel like he wasn't weird or odd, and that he has a place in this world just like everybody else. So being able to see themselves in these books and know that there are other people out there like them, to have role models that look like them or that are in their particular demographic group, really matters for teenagers. That's all on that.
Good thing to share. So I'm glad Patti was giving me some time actually to pull up. This is the Elmhurst Public Library's collection management policy. So we're not going to go through the whole entire thing, but this is something that you can access on our website for those of you who are in the webinar who are Elmhurst residents. For those of you in the webinar who are not Elmhurst residents, your library is likely going to have something very similar on their website that lays out exactly how they make collection decisions. So some things from this first paragraph that I really wanted to pick out and mention are that we buy the widest possible diversity of views and expressions. And as Patti mentioned earlier from that freedom to read statement, the freedom to read, hear, and view is essential to our democracy. And all individuals have a right to choose which library materials they'll use. They just can't restrict the rights of others to use materials. And that parents or guardians should be monitoring and supervising their children's choice of library materials. And then another big one that I always remind myself of when I'm buying books is that the selection of any item or resource does not constitute an endorsement of its contents by the library. So we buy things from all over the spectrum. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're promulgating or that we agree with every statement in our collection. We just think that it's really important that there be a reader for every book and a book for every reader at our library. So going down a little bit, you'll see that the library does endorse those ALA intellectual freedom statements that Patti mentioned on the first slide. And moving down again, you'll see that our collection development policy is influenced by things in our vision statement. So this is like springing forth from our values. And going down again, you'll see that we have selection criteria when we pick a book. So oftentimes when a book is put in the collection, it wasn't just like, you know, me or Patti being like, gosh, I'd really like to read this book. I'm just going to use the library's money to buy it. Okay, thanks. It's always that it springs from these selection criteria. So there's a lot of thought that goes into every book that's put in the collection. One quote that I found really interesting going into this next part is from the ALA's Director of Intellectual Freedom. If you focus on 5 passages, you've got obscenity. If you broaden your view and read the work as a whole, you've got Toni Morrison's Beloved. So that ties into this part of our collection policy here, that consideration is given to the work as a whole, and no work should be excluded because of specific content taken out of context. So a lot of times in challenges lately, a parent will get up in front of, you know, the library board or the school board, and they'll read the most salacious, the most, you know, transgressive, the, you know, most shocking parts of a book. And they'll be like, this is, you know, the part and parcel of the book. But a lot of times they've cherry picked the part of the book that they think is going to get the biggest rise out of people. So materials are always considered holistically rather than as the sum of their most, you know, transgressive parts. Let's see, moving down a little bit again. And this is another thing to note here, is that patron use is the most powerful influence on the library's collection. So it's very much our goal to buy things that people are using. And then down here at the bottom, this is where you can see that request for reconsideration of library materials. Here's where it has the policy all laid out of exactly what that takes. And I'm not going to get into that too much. It's more relevant if you were to like challenge a material yourself. But another thing to keep in mind with that is that while a material is being challenged, it's still available on the shelf during that reconsideration process. So we don't pull it while it's being considered. It's available during the consideration process. And one other thing I wanted to show you here is just what the reconsideration form looks like. So you would say, what's the author? What's the call number? What's the title? And then this is a really key piece that I mentioned earlier. Did you read the entire work? So did you consider the work as a whole? And then what specifically did you find objectionable? And then what do you think could result from other people reading it? So the person who had a challenge would fill all of this out. And then as detailed in the policy, it would go through library staff. And Mary Beth is definitely the expert on exactly the circuitous path that would take through the library, but it would definitely get considered by multiple staff members, and a decision would be made based on the collection development policy. So it wouldn't just be like a random decision based on how we're feeling that day, so to speak. And then moving along here, these are some of the links that we put in. And like I said, we're going to make this presentation available to you so you can look at some of the links we consulted and then just do a little bit more reading. Here's some of these other links, specifically the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. We wanted to highlight because graphic novels have been the target of a lot of these challenges lately, which I think, Patti, you would agree, that's another trend that's kind of new, that graphic novels are such a target of these challenges.
Yeah, and they've been, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund started in the mid-'80s, but there was censorship and congressional hearings about comic books in the 50s that they were causing crime and juvenile delinquency. So there's always been some suspicion or extra eyes put on comic books or the format that graphic novels are in, where the illustrations are as important as the text of the book. And the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund has statements on their website now about what's happening with Mouse. They've had things with what's happening to Drama, the other book that we mentioned.
So here's just a list of links that we didn't previously cite in other slides. So again, you can definitely look at this on your own after the fact. But Patti, I think I'm good to open it up to questions unless there's anything else you wanted to make sure we shared first.
No, I'm good.
All right, let's open it up for questions. And I believe that one of the League of Women Voters members is going to read the questions aloud from the chat, is how this is going to work.
That would be me. And really the only question that we have so far in the chat is somebody asking if Mary Beth would please explain when a challenge would go to the library, I think board is what they mean.
I'm going to go ahead and pull up the challenge policy, Mary Beth, just so they have something to look at while you talk about it.
Right. So I believe that Marcy Rodriguez is also on this in this Zoom meeting, and she is assistant director at the library, and she's also the collection manager. So she works a lot with, well, she sees any reconsideration that comes through the library. I see most of them too. But what she'll do when something comes in is, when a reconsideration request comes to us, is she'll look at the request, she'll review it. She'll usually talk with the selector of the item, and the selector means that at the library, all different librarians or library staff members have different areas of selection that they buy books for. For instance, I buy cookbooks because I like cookbooks and know a lot about them. So that's a collection that I buy, not usually challenged, which is kind of nice, but anyway. So I buy the cookbooks. So if a challenge were to come through with about a cookbook, which it never does, Marcy would then meet with me. We would talk about the book. We would find out where I selected it from, why I selected it. And we would look at the age group and all these other things, depending on what the challenge said. It would then be considered whether or not we thought that the challenge was taking it to the next level, like, hey, maybe there is some merit to this challenge. Maybe this book that they're challenging actually does belong in the adult collection, or no, there is no merit to this challenge that we can see. So we leave the book where it is. A book that would get to the board would usually be something that I think is either requested by the patron. So a patron says, I want this to go to the board, and we would bring it to the board. And or something that got to the level of actually removing something from the collection, which we rarely do. In fact, I don't even remember in my 10 years at the library ever removing something from the collection. So there may have been a time or two when we did discover, yeah, this book really does belong in the teen collection as opposed to the juvenile collection, and we might have done that. But to remove a book off the shelves, and I just want to point out too that the presentation Alyssa and Patti gave was so thorough, it was really excellent. But we also get challenges on things like obviously videos or things people can watch. We also get challenges on programs. We've had a few challenges recently on programs. So it's not just books that are challenged in libraries. It can be any sort of format that we're carrying and or programming. So book that would get to the library would usually be, a book that would get to the board would usually be when a patron requests that the board review it. So throughout our process, we go through this process where the librarian, the selector, the collection development manager go ahead and review the challenge. And if the patron still isn't happy with our response to them, for instance, saying, no, we're not going to remove this book from the collection, or no, we're not going to put this book in the adult collection, they can still request a hearing in front of the Board of Trustees. And then we would take it to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees would hear about that reconsideration. Marcy, I can't see you because the screen is up, but if you're there and you have anything else to add, please do so.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm in the basement, and that's why the lighting is so poor. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Good. No, I think Mary Beth, you pretty much covered it. When usually the requests will go to a public desks, and then they end up at my desk at some point. Then I go through my research and review process, depending on just as what you said, reach out to the selector. And then after a review time and a research time, then I will respond back to the patron, letting them know what we have decided to do with the item and giving them the opportunity to, if they wish to take it to the board, that they can do so.
Thank you, Marcy.
Yep, thank you. Alyssa, do you want to take your screen down so that we
Oh,
can
sure.
see it all now? And you could put it
Will
back up, I
do.
think, if people want it back up. Okay, so the next question is, do people submitting challenges ever come to the library board meetings? And this person is thinking about the intensity of school board meetings and hoping it's not also happening at library meetings.
So I'll take that one, but
Yes, definitely.
yeah, it hasn't happened yet. I'm not sure that it won't happen. I do believe it might have started happening at some other libraries. I will tell you that several years ago, there was an issue in the community right after the Sandy Hook shootings when a couple of people, a small group of people wanted M-rated video games banned from the library. And that group did come to board meetings. The challenge for the M-rated video games essentially kind of died off and went away, and nothing was changed about that. But that group did come to library board meetings to express their viewpoint.
Right. Okay, then let me see. What do you recommend is the best way to support the library and its policies against some of the attacks on books, the library and librarians in our community? Anybody have a?
I have some input there. Just check out the books that you want to read. Come to the library first when you're looking for resources. We've got a lot of great stuff here. And like I mentioned in our collection development policy, patron demand is one of the biggest things that we consider when we buy books. So kind of the best way to vote for the things that you want to see in your library is just to check out the books that you like to read here. So I would say that's the biggest way from my perspective that you can support us. But Mary Beth and Marcy might have a higher level perspective here.
So, we just met today, a group of the department heads at the library, just to talk about some of these things and the upticks and reconsideration requests. And again, it hasn't been a big issue at our library, but we know it's heating up throughout the country. And what we're going to be doing is really providing an educational campaign for our patrons. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's something we plan to work on and push forth within the next couple of months, because I think that as the place in the community that people can actually trust for information for any information, but also for information on any of these banned books or challenges that are happening, we are that place in the community. So it's time for us now to not react, but to form an offensive, I think, and educate people, and also be that place where people like you can come and ask questions or come to a meeting just like this one, where you can listen or debate or talk. So that's something that we plan to do and we're going to meet next week and kind of scope out what we're going to do as a plan to really make this a platform moving forward over the next couple months, at least, or over the next year, so that our patrons know and our community knows they can come to us. So I encourage you to come to us, to use us as your information point. You know, you're listening to Alyssa and Patti, who know so much about these things and so much about the collection. Then you have someone like Marcy, who manages the entire collection and works with all these selectors. And so libraries are that place in the community where you can get more information on this. So support us, like Alyssa said, come to the library. And if you have questions, ask us first. If there's a program that you'd like to see regarding this, just like the League of Women Voters came to us and said, hey, we want a program on this for the League, we were able to set that up and get Alyssa and Patti out here to do this. So I think that's the way that we as a community can make sure that we're, I'm not going to say banding against these bans, but that's sort of what we're doing. We're just making sure everybody knows what this actually entails. And when I do talk to people, when they have an issue with something in the collection, what I usually try to point out to them is just that real simple, well, I think there's something in this collection that would offend everyone, including me. There's probably multiple things. There's things I won't watch up in the DVDs or in the movies. There's things I don't want to read. And there probably are for each one of you too. But if we started to take off everything that offended each one of us, we'd have nothing left. So that's that whole concept. And I think the more we can get the word out there, the better it's going to be for us and our community. So that's kind of how we plan to move forward with this. And I'm really happy to see so many people here at this program. It's great and I'm really happy that the League decided to do this. So thank you.
Yeah. And I would just like to comment, just knowing how things are run, that seems like departments, like everybody in the library, all the people who work there are involved in these discussions. So they have richness to them among the library staff themselves. So it's not just, nobody's out there hanging out there on their own. Okay, Ina asked, it was recently reported by a politically conservative right-wing group that a LGBTQIA children's book was removed from the children's area and placed in the adult section. Could you please speak to this and the library's decision to move the book?
So I'm going to take this one because that is misinformation. Yeah. So that is not true. The book did not get moved. I did see that on the website, but I saw it only because someone else pointed it out to me, because I don't go to that website. But that book was never removed. We did receive 3 challenges from community members on that book. We took it to the board only because the reconsideration request at that time said that all reconsiderations go to the board. The board looked at the reconsiderations requests. There was a little bit of discussion. You can see that in our minutes from the September meeting, which are on our website. But the book was never entertained by the board to even take a vote to do anything with removing this book or changing its location. Marcy got those requests, just like we talked about our process. She looked into the book. We researched where the book should be shelved according to the age range that it's published for, which is I believe it was 10 years old and up. So that would actually belong in our youth services department or our kids department where it was shelved. So we did nothing with it. I do not know why that group put that they got it removed from the youth collection and put upstairs in the teen collection, but that was not correct information. The reporter from the Patch, David Giuliani, actually called me on Tuesday, and I did tell him that information was incorrect, and he did write a story about it in the Patch.
And the characterization of that book really was incorrect too. It was a general sex education book for all children, as I recall looking at it. I mean, it was kind of, I feel like it was mischaracterized as well.
Yeah.
And endorsed by Barry Brazelton. If any of you remember Dr. Brazelton, that's how old it was, this book. Okay. From Amy, is there a relationship between school librarians and community librarians, and do challenges at one bleed into the other? I have concerns about school libraries having more pressure and less power to push back against challenges. But I know that the keepers of knowledge know how to nudge kids to other resources. You can get it at your town library, for example.
Patti, you might have a little more to say here. I don't work as closely with the schools.
Yeah, I work with the high school librarians, and being in this position, for over 10 years, I don't recall any of the schools ever telling me about a challenge or a ban. And that's, I'm talking about York High School, IC Catholic Prep, and Timothy Christian. I don't know what all their collection development policies are, but I know they do have them, and they would follow their procedure if there was a challenge, but I haven't heard anything about that ever happening. And I know, like York High School, I communicate with their librarian more frequently because that's where the majority of our students are. And they have a very good collection. They have, books that are designated teen or YA, and then they have adult books that are recommended for teens as well. And they do send them over here for, their budget is limited, and they do send them over here because we have a bigger selection, and sometimes we have more copies when they need that. But yeah, knock wood, they haven't had any challenges that I know of.
So just a little more background information too for everyone. Patti is the teen services librarian, so she does interface with the librarians over at York High School. And we do have a dedicated librarian too in the youth services or the kids department who works with the elementary schools in Elmhurst. And she hasn't had anything that she's heard about that I've been aware of either. But yes, we do work closely with the schools, and obviously we try to support each other in curriculum, and we try to support their curriculum with stuff that we carry. And also we fill in with materials that they don't have, because obviously they don't have the space that we have and the breadth of budget that we have. So we complement each other as much as we can, but we do work closely with them.
Right. And Betty, I don't want to put you on the spot, but weren't you a librarian at York High School? Do you remember any challenges when you were there?
No, but I remember that the collection development statement said that any challenge demanded that all people read the book entirely and talk about it entirely. So Alyssa's comment about you can't cherry pick, the idea of the book as a whole is what makes a difference. And I cannot tell you, we could not have survived York High School without the public librarian support and even the college library support. It is really exciting to be a member of a team beyond just the schools. So I'd like to acknowledge the public library for that, and Patti's spectacular. So
thank you. Okay. Susan said, we can only assume that challenges will continue to increase in the future. How do you prepare for increasingly politically motivated banning, and what can we do as members of the community to support efforts to keep your collection from succumbing to a vocal minority?
So I'm just going to say that I know that what we do have is a really great board. Marcia is on the board, so I'm not just saying this because she's in this meeting, but our board is supportive of the ideas of what a public library is all about, which is access and intellectual freedom. So I'm really pleased to tell you all that, because I don't know that every library has that support. I'm not talking about any I know right now, but we have heard news within our library world that there have been library board members who have been either elected or appointed specifically to make sure that libraries' budgets are cut and the books are banned, and that there's all kinds of things going on like that. So we do not have that here in this town. I'm very happy to report that. Hopefully it never gets to that point. So being just strong patrons like you are, strong citizens, knowing these challenges exist, knowing it's a thing, that's what you can do to help us. I will say, years ago when we had the challenges to the M-rated video games, it didn't gain any traction. It was a very select few people. And when the group of people wanting the M-rated video games tried to get them banned, other people in the community came out and said, hey, we're not necessarily saying we want to play M-rated video games, but we also know what it means to have those M-rated video games removed from the shelf. So this community did not come out with that group. And that group was based out of fear too. And I get where they were coming from after the Sandy Hook shooting. It was a horrific event and they were trying to do something in the way that they thought they could. But those challenges died out. And I really believe it died out because our community did not get behind them. So as long as our community doesn't get behind anything that starts to happen, we're good. And if something does start to happen, what we do know and what I've seen recently is that squeaky wheel really gets a lot of attention because of the motives that people use. And at that point, we would call on our community and let them know, and hopefully they would come out in support of not banning items or not pulling books.
Can I say something, Marcia?
Sure.
So at the last school board meeting, which was Tuesday night, there were several books put on display. Part of District 205's policy is that any new literature, any new books at all are put on display for 30 days. So all of that information is on the District 205 website and under resources, and you can fill out a form. But if you have any concerns, or I think if you're positive about specific books. So the books that they were talking about was English language arts and social emotional learning, which social emotional learning is being attacked as by some people at the school board, some not on the school board, but who observe the school board meetings as critical race theory. So if you go and look at those books and see that they're, talking about kindness, that perhaps doesn't mean critical race theory. And perhaps if you, could send in a supporting statement for those books, that may be useful.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, and it seems like there was also pushback on the group that was wanting to ban, it's perfectly normal. So that there was some pushback on that too. Okay, I'm going to mess up this name. Ioana? Is that right? Okay, anyway, commented, thank you for organizing this, so informative and useful. Our family embraces banned books as great conversation starters. And
it's interesting that she says that. Actually, when we were doing research for this, I'm not sure if Patti came across this too, but LeVar Burton, the former host of Reading Rainbow, said that, banned books, it's like a signpost to where all the good stuff is. Definitely people who, use those banned books lists as a good reading list. Like, why was it banned? And, are actually more drawn to those books because of challenges.
Well, and I like what she said about good talking points or starting conversations. I was actually today, I don't know if anybody's heard of the Common Sense Media website, and it's for families. They tend to be conservative. I don't, always agree with what they say. I try to look at their viewpoints, but I was looking at their comments on the book Speak that we were just talking about, the girl who was a victim of sexual assault. And that was, many of the comments were that it would start a good conversation between parents and children.
okay, Alyssa posted where you can get the board meeting minutes mentioned by Mary Beth. And Ina thanked you, Mary Beth, for answering her questions and addressing the inaccuracy. And Megan said, love a LeVar Burton reference. So, and I'm going to end with the comment that Carol made. I absolutely love our local library and I'm a frequent flyer. I feel so fortunate to live in a community that supports such a great resource. So thank you everybody for coming. Unless there's other questions, I don't mean to cut things off. I think this was such an important discussion so that we're all more prepared to go out into the community, and when there's attacks on the library or books or information, we have a much better sense of the bigger issue and how it gets handled and why we need to support our local library and access for all information for all people. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. Okay,
Bye-bye. Nice to see everybody again.
Thanks to our presenters. We appreciate it.
okay,
It was our
bye.
pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Mhm.
Let's see if she's
Okay.
more off. Sometimes I do. That's why I'm.
It's sad when everybody starts leaving.
Yeah, that was perfect. And we didn't have to go out in the snow.
No,
Yeah.
I just noticed a last minute question. Is Susan Ottenfeld still here?
Uh,
I'm not
No.
sure.
She asked if about the board, yeah.
Yeah, I just noticed that after we closed up. I think she asked it as we're all leaving. Oh, well.
Okay.
We're not
No,
elected.
I think it was good. I don't know that we would have had that many come out tonight, so
Yeah.
the Zoom
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
a good choice.
Yeah.
And I didn't see the phone numbers could have, I mean, there were a few names that didn't show up, Jan, so maybe